Welcome to the U.S. Center. My name is Ashley Allen, and I work with the White House Council on Environmental Quality. I'll be your MC for today, so really happy to have you with us for this exciting event. This event is the Rewards and Challenges for Women Addressing Climate Change. So our panelists here today will discuss with you career pathways, challenges, opportunities that they've had along the way, and give us some really good sound advice for those of us that are advancing our careers in climate change. I want to introduce you to our moderator, but first let me just welcome our web audience. Thank you so much for tuning in all over the world, and please send us your questions. This is going to be a very interactive panel, so send us your questions with hashtag AskUSCenter. Okay? Also, if everyone could just sort of hold your questions until we give the panelists a chance to each give their introductory remarks, and then we'll have a really engaging discussion then toward the end. I'm pleased to introduce to you Alice Madden, who's the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Intergovernmental and External Affairs at the U.S. Department of Energy. And in this capacity, she serves as the interface between the Department of Energy and local, state, and tribal governments and other relevant constituencies. And right now, the big thrust is to achieve the goals of the President's Climate Action Plan. She began her career in the high-tech industry, followed by almost a 10-year commercial litigation practice. And in 2000, she was elected to the Colorado House of Representatives, where she served as the majority leader from 2004 to 2008, so a varied career that Alice has had. More recently, she served as the Timothy E. Worth Chair in Sustainable Development at the University of Colorado. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Madden.
Is this on? Oh, there we go. Thank you, Ashley, and thanks to the U.S. Center for having us here today. Welcome to Gender Day at the COP. I'm really excited about this panel. This is the second Gender Day that a COP has had. The first one was at Doha, and the idea was to raise awareness around issues with women and climate, celebrate women's roles, and I think, more importantly, start addressing the gap. We know that there's a big gap of women in science, there's a big gap of women in policy and politics. So today we're going to be talking to three leaders. We're going to start with a little bit of background about how they got where they are. I always think that's fascinating to listen from women leaders, how they've approached their career. Mine, as you saw, was a bit haphazard. We'll hear if they've had mentors along the way. Many women oftentimes don't feel supported in the sciences or even in politics or policy, so it's important to build networks. And so we'll be talking about a number of different items along that way. And again, why women's views and perceptions around climate change are so important at events like this, where we're negotiating really the future of our planet. So I'm going to dive in with introductions. I'm going to start with Samantha, and you go by Sam, right? Sam Smith is the leader of the World Wildlife Fund's Global Climate and Energy Initiative, a lawyer by training and a passionate climate advocate by choice. As a leader of WWF's Global Climate and Energy Initiative, she leads the front to influence global policy and actions related to climate change and energy. Sam has worked on climate change for several decades, starting her professional career as a corporate litigation attorney. Wasn't that awful? We're both former reformed lawyers, and with an emphasis on securities and environmental matters. She moved to Norway, and led her to join one of the world's largest environmental organizations, WWF. As director of its Arctic program, she spent a decade observing and experiencing the impact of climate change firsthand. She worked for the Norwegian energy company Statoil, is that how you say it? Statoil, developing wind power projects. She rejoined WWF in 2011 as the leader of its Global Climate and Energy Initiative. And we're going to hear more about her career in a moment. And she attended law at the University of Berkeley, California. On Skype, we have Wanjira Mathai, and she is the project leader for the Wangari Maathai Institute for Peace and Environmental Studies. She's the outgoing director of the International Affairs at Green Belt Movement, where she managed outreach and resource mobilization. For 6 years prior, she worked as the senior program officer at the Carter Presidential Center in Atlanta, Georgia, where she was monitoring and evaluating disease eradication programs. Since 2002, she's been directing international affairs at GBM, which was founded by her mother, the late Nobel Peace Prize laureate Wangari Maathai. She currently serves on the board of directors for both GBM and WMI. She grew up in Kenya, traveled to the United States for college, and she graduated. She's a graduate of Hobart and William Smith Colleges and earned graduate degrees from Emory, Rollins School of Public Health, and the Gozeta, I hope that I'm pronouncing that right, School of Business. And last, Nancy Sutley. She is the chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality, or otherwise known as CEQ. As chair, she serves as the principal environmental policy advisor to the President of the United States. Prior to her appointment, Nancy was deputy mayor for energy and environment for the city of Los Angeles. She represented LA on the board of directors for the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California and served on the state's Water Resource Control Board. She's worked for California Governor Gray Davis as energy advisor, managing state and federal regulations, legislative affairs, finances, and press relations. So we have 3 varied careers here. And I'm going to start with Sam. Why don't you tell us a little bit of how you got here today? And particularly, we'd love to hear about how maybe networking and mentoring played a role in your professional career.
I think that's live. There we go. So we do share a dark past. We're both recovering lawyers. I studied history. I have a history degree from Berkeley and also a law degree. And while I was in law school, actually, with a bunch of other folks, I got a grant from a foundation to work on basically an awareness raising and training program for the California court system about domestic violence and child custody mediation. And I was also engaged with some other initiatives to provide free legal services to the poor. But then I got out of law school and I went into corporate litigation, which I did for whatever it was, 5 or 6 years, in working mostly on securities and finance cases. That's at that time, now I'm 50, right? So at that time, that was a very male-dominated sector of law, I think one main reflection from that is that in those sectors, you really learn, if you're a woman of my generation, you learn to hold your own, right? So you learn that you have to be maybe tougher and more assertive and all of these other things than many of your male colleagues, just in order to be taken seriously. Now this is changing, I feel. I feel it's changing both for men and for women. So I'm talking about things that were true 20, 25 years ago. I really liked litigation. I've also done a lot of sports, so that is probably something in my personality that's attractive to this kind of stuff. But I also found, as I was doing it, that the stuff that really had most meaning for me was the stuff I was doing pro bono. So I was doing a lot of volunteer work for different organizations on different rights issues. And then I had my first child. And then it was as if all of the meaning that was in my day job kind of went out of the job and went into my child. So I had this sort of crisis where I thought, okay, I'm a mother, I really want to spend time with my child. I can't do that and be a corporate litigator and do the stuff that really has meaning for me, which was the pro bono work, so I have to make some choices. So I made a huge choice. And in some ways kind of a random choice. My husband at the time was Norwegian, so we decided, okay, we're going to move to Norway from San Francisco, which we did, and I was a stay-at-home mom for a year, and then I started to work actually part-time for the World Wildlife Fund in its Arctic program. I thought, okay, I'm probably not built to be full-time stay-at-home mom, but I'm going to get a part-time job. And so somehow after that, I became director of the program, had another child, worked part-time, did all of those things that, women who have formal work and employment, if we're lucky, we're able to do it. We're able to work part-time. I was very lucky to be able to be on leave and so forth, and have lived in Norway since then. Now, in the Arctic, that was also sort of a major transition because I went from corporate litigator to wearing, green rubber boots and being out in the field in Siberia on a pretty regular basis, talking to everybody and working with folks from indigenous reindeer herders in Chukotka all the way up to ministers at times, and cleaning my own office and doing a lot of the other things that you do in civil society. but I did still get a lot from my first career from corporate litigation. So it does give you the ability to stand up and speak in public, often in complete sentences. And you, you do get used to the idea of producing things very, very quickly under deadline. And it does give you a lack of fear, I would say, in tough discussions, which you need if you work on climate change, right? It's very important for us to be mostly respectful, but in civil society, you have to be unafraid. And after I'd been in the Arctic program for 10 years, I participated in something called the Arctic Climate Impact Assessment. And that was the first full-scale look at what climate change was doing to the Arctic now and what it was expected to do in the future. And it was really an eye-opener for me, right? Because I had understood, like a lot of people in traditional environmental organizations, that climate change was something that was going to happen decades from now. Don't really have to think about it too much. Let's focus on fish and protected areas. What I understood from that process was that, no, it is happening right now, it's really serious, and it's coming to all parts of the world, and it's actually affecting people's lives and livelihoods all over the world, not only in the Arctic, but also in small island states, and as we see, for example, now, also in developed countries that are being hit by extreme weather events. So at that point, I decided, all right, this is it. This is the big issue. It's climate change. This is the thing I need to work on. Now, the problem with doing that from the Arctic is that the Arctic is mostly a recipient, right? So it's mostly a place that's feeling impacts. The solutions don't really lie there. And since I by then had become a single mother with 2 kids, I then had to stay in Norway for various reasons, and so I went back into the private sector, and I worked in the newly started New Energy division of Statoil, which at that time was an oil company trying to turn itself into an energy company. So I worked on the commercial side, traded carbon, developed wind power projects, so utility scale projects in the US and in Europe, and in a way loved it, right? Because I loved the sort of nitty-gritty of technology and finance and stuff like that. But despite the fact that on the year that I left, the biggest project in Statoil, the biggest capital expenditure project, was actually a wind project. Still, it was an oil company with a green division. And so eventually I got to a level of seniority in the company after 4 years where I had to make a choice. Either I stood for everything that the company did, or I had to leave. I mean, you can't sort of be green in your heart and at the same time have a job where you're defending, for example, investments in tar sands. So I left. I came back to WWF. I've been in this job for 2.5 years. I don't know if this is my last career as a climate advocate. By the way, I didn't write my blurb. It's a little embarrassing. But I will just say a few things about this kind of career path. I mean, again, I think it's important first of all, I always feel so lucky to have the choices I've had, right? So I'm just really, I know I'm lucky. And that's also been my approach as I've thought about what I'm doing and what I'm going to do next. I'm really fortunate, and I should make the best of the choices that I have. I'm fortunate to have had access to education. I'm fortunate to live in Norway. I'm fortunate to have health and healthy children and all of these other things. The second thing is to, not to be afraid, because I think we have, as women, also men, we have, and especially if you're a head of household, you have so many fears about, am I doing the right thing for my children? If you're a single mom, you have a job that takes you away from home on a regular basis. What if I lose my job and I can't support all of us? Like, all of those things go through your head. But what I found is that I make the best choices and I do my best work when I'm not afraid to take chances and to make different choices. The other thing I would say is that it's not just about mentors. I've been lucky to have mentors, mostly men, but also at Statoil, we had a fantastic woman leading us in the new energy department, and she was really inspiring. And when she left, I also knew it was time for me to go. But at the moment, I would say a lot of my mentoring and learning actually comes from the people around me, comes from people who are in, who are in my management group, who report to me, who are more talented than I am in many ways, and from whom I'm learning all the time. It comes from other colleagues in civil society who inspire me all the time with their courage and their focus on doing the right thing, their willingness to take risks, and their amazing moral compasses. And so I think as women in climate change, it's important to be grateful for the opportunities you get, at least that's my perspective. And it's important to be open to all the stuff that you learn from people around you. It's not necessarily a hierarchy that gives you your best learning. Sometimes it's people who aren't in any hierarchy or they're at the bottom of their hierarchy who are most inspiring. And I would also apply that to the youth activists here. I am happy to say that my daughter, who is almost 16, my daughter is a youth activist. So she's in the Youth Labour Party back there in Norway. She's launched on her youth political career. And when I listen to her, and I listen to her sort of fierceness and her very clear understanding of the issues, the way that she's inspiring me to be more of an activist and less of a talker, then I feel as if maybe I've done some things right with my career choices and my parenting.
Wow, thank you so much. Wanjira, welcome. Can you hear us okay?
Very well, thanks. I hope you can hear me.
We can. That sounds great. Well, we're looking forward to hearing a little bit about your backstory. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, my backstory starts here in Kenya and takes me to the United States, as you said in your introductory remarks. Maybe I should also say I'm most grateful to be part of this panel, and I appreciate your letting me join you by Skype. I hope it's, as I know I'm the biggest in the room on that screen. I'm just sorry that I'm not on those comfortable seats. And thank you again also that Gender Day is still part of the International Climate Talks, and I really hope that it remains there because it's certainly a strategic imperative, this question, and I look forward to the discussion. But my journey, as you said, started here in Kenya. I born and raised here, and then went to the United States to college and found myself interested very much in science and excelled in science. So I guess that's why I stayed there. I studied biology, chemistry, and then went on to do my public health degree. I was very interested in working with people and the intersection between health and community. I wasn't so much interested in the medicine per se, but I was interested in population health. And so my mentors in college directed me quite wisely to public health. And in the course of my studies, I happened to find myself in Atlanta, of course, and that's where the Carter Center is. And I started working as an intern first at the Carter Center and at the Centers for Disease Control, looking at issues of diseases which were largely in my part of the world, but I had never heard of them. I had never heard of guinea worms, schistosomiasis, dracunculiasis, all these diseases that were inflicting millions of people in Africa, especially in my region, and yet I had never heard of them. I had been raised in Kenya, and so how come these diseases had passed me? So I knew that there was something drastically wrong going on, that I needed to be part of that action. And so I went straight in and accepted a job at the Carter Center working on disease eradication in Latin America and in Africa. And I spent a lot of time traveling in parts of Latin America, but also particularly in East and West Africa, where I really understood at that point that regardless of what the issue was, in this case it was health and it was the distribution of chemotherapy for particular diseases, whatever the issue was, we really had to find the string that would make our impact felt. What was the group or the community or the nugget that we needed to push, the button that we needed to be part of to be able to have a successful implementation? And I realized that regardless of what the issue was, health, and now in my work in the environment, that the role that women played was central. We had to find the leaders in the community who were largely mothers and looking after their children, fetching firewood, and really the ones inflicted by disease when they went out to to collect water for the family or fetch firewood. And so when they're on their way home, they would be thirsty, they would drink this water, and then a year later, they would be inflicted with some of the most debilitating illnesses. And so we realized that if we were going to have an impact, a meaningful impact, we had to design our programs around women. And so I was in that program for 6 years. And after 6 years, and then also went back to school and studied strategic management, I decided that I wanted to take a break. So I actually came home back to Kenya, and I thought I would be coming to take a year break and just think and relax and read and spend time on the beach. But that was not to be, because as soon as my mother knew I was coming home, she had a list of things that I was to help her do. So when I arrived, I was immediately drafted into the Greenbelt movement, and slowly I got infected, and it became really my life's work. I have been there now for 10 years and was fortunate really to have worked with my mother for 10 years, almost every day. And I really feel privileged to have been able to have been mentored by her, but also to have walked in her shadows and seen the passion, the commitment, the persistence that is required for the sort of success that we are looking for, the kind of commitment to involving women, the grassroots women. She used to call it the heavy lifting that we have to do to be able to make meaningful impact. And so for a country like Kenya that has close to 70% of women at the grassroots, working with women, it became a strategic imperative. And so for any meaningful impact to happen, it became obvious to me, and it has become part of my refrain, because not only have I seen it, I completely believe it because of the journey that I have taken. So the work that we've continued to do here in Nairobi, and now, most grateful to the US government for the leadership in the Partnership for Women's Entrepreneurship in Renewables, the W Power, which I'll speak a little bit more about. That program is also one that is highlighting the critical importance of investing in women as a strategic imperative, investing in women to scale up the initiatives that we need to make an impact meaningful. So that's basically the journey.
Thank you so much. Just what time is it at your home?
It's now, I think, 6:30, thereabouts.
Okay, I couldn't quite figure that out. Well, thank you so much. It's really an honor for you to be able to, I'm so glad you could join us. Thank you again. And last, we'll hear from Nancy about how she ended up here today.
Ended up here today. We took the tram over. Just kidding. Sorry. Well, I guess I would. You said, so one of you said haphazard. I maybe accidental. I don't know. I guess I'm one of those people who plans, but I guess from a young age, my parents, who were both immigrants to the United States, really emphasized how important education was. And my mother, when I was young, my mother, who had never never gone to college, decided that she would put herself through school, and so she left my older sister in charge of my brother and me, which I think she's still mad at us about, my sister, that is, and got her degree, and got a graduate degree, and went on to be a teacher. So I learned at an early age that, if you want to do something, you can, and it was important to give something back to your community. So I was I think of my life as extremely fortunate to have been born to parents who cared a lot about education, fortunate to be born in a country with access to education. I went to public schools in New York City, was able to go to college, got my graduate degree in public policy from Harvard, and shortly after I finished graduate school, moved along with many of my classmates, to Washington, D.C., and I really had no idea what I was going to do and why was I going to do it, but I was interested in the areas of energy and environment, because I thought those were areas of public policy where you could actually apply solutions and see the results of them in a very direct way. And I did a number of things in Washington. I remember writing my first paper when I was working for a small public affairs firm in 1988 about the greenhouse effect, which was global warming's prior name, climate change's prior name, and went on, did a number of different things in the energy environment area, and then in 1993 went to work for the Clinton administration at the Environmental Protection Agency. And I spent about 3 years at EPA in Washington working on a number of issues, mostly around air pollution. And then at that point I thought, if I don't leave Washington now, I'll never leave. So I moved from EPA's office in Washington to EPA's office in San Francisco, California, and spent another 3 years at EPA. And then one thing led to another. I worked for the state of California in the California Environmental Protection Agency, and then was appointed to the State Water Resources Control Board, which is a full-time regulatory board in California. And after I finished that up, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I thought I would just take a few months to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, and got a call from a mentor of mine who was helping the new mayor of Los Angeles hire some folks to help. So I moved to Los Angeles and was a deputy mayor there, and saw the impact that you could have at the local level on the environment as people experience it every day. So we put together the city's first comprehensive climate plan. We discovered that working in a large city that owns its own utility, its water and power utility, that you could have a really big impact. It also happened to be one of the dirtiest utilities in California, but well, that's besides the point. But it really provided an opportunity to try some things out at the local level. And I think in our earlier discussion, Matt Rodriguez, who's now the Secretary of Cal EPA, was talking about the support in California for addressing climate change. And I was sort of there in the beginning of some of the state level efforts to address climate change in California. I think one of the first bills, pieces of legislation in the United States at the state level to regulate greenhouse gas emissions happened in 2002. It was a bill to regulate greenhouse gases from automobiles. And my unique contribution was to tell my boss at the time that this was a big deal. And I felt that it was an important contribution because, there's literally thousands of bills that go through the California legislature every year, and this was in fact a very big deal. And then I was very honored in December of 2008 to be asked to head CEQ and to come join the Obama administration and to be part of a really remarkable team and a remarkable for a remarkable president at a remarkable time. And it's been not without its challenges, certainly. Anybody who's been following climate change issues domestically in the United States or internationally knows it's just been a challenge for the U.S. But I think with the President's Climate Action Plan, we're putting ourselves on a road to really provide the kind of leadership that the United States should provide to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, to ensure that we are prepared to deal with the impacts of climate change, and to be among the leaders around the world. And certainly there is an important role for women in climate change. I see it, my colleagues around the administration, including yourself, that we really do have an important role to play. But I think also clearly at the grassroots level, whether it's in the United States or all around the world, the decisions and the roles that women play in their communities have a tremendous impact on our ability to address really the challenge of our time.
Thank you. So it's on, there we go. Thank you very much. I'm just going to give a really abbreviated a note on my background. Probably the biggest decision I ever made in my life was made by a man, Richard Nixon. During the Vietnam War, I decided, and Watergate, I decided I needed to run for office one day. I was 12. It took me 30 years. I didn't run for office till I was 42 years old, but and then Ronald Reagan really ensured that I would do that someday. And I ended up practicing law, and the next two people who made the biggest change in my life were my two boys. I had two children while I was practicing law, and became overnight bored to tears with commercial litigation, and just thought, I need to be part of a bigger picture. I need to help change the world. And I ran for office. And I was in a minority at that time. Colorado was a conservative state at that time. That wasn't a great place to be, so I led the effort to change that, and it was quite a surprise to people. We flipped the state house in 2004. And then 2 years later, Bill Ritter was elected to governor, and we literally went from lagging the country in energy policy to leading it within 2 short years. So it was a great place to be at a great time. And when I was at the university most recently, I really started focusing on women and minorities, trying to get more women into sustainability, both in the science end and the policy end, and again, minorities as well. I only have some US statistics with me today, but we know that women are the first to feel, around the world, first to feel the effects of climate change, whether that means trying to get clean water for their families, the ability to get food, the increase in disease, but we cannot just be seen as vulnerable. We have to be seen and recognized and celebrated as change agents. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about next. I know these numbers are quite different in some countries. They're better in some and they're far worse in others, but 14% of the physicists in the United States are women. I just find that to be amazing. And again, in the political side as well, we're woefully behind and becoming close to have equal leadership in politics. And the late, great Ann Richards, who was governor of Texas, said about women in politics, she said, well, we make up half the population and we gave birth to the other half. So yeah, we should be in politics. And that's actually one of the reasons I also ran. I just thought, what is stopping me? I've read that in the US, we need 1 million more STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, that's the term people use, STEM. We need 1 million more STEM professionals in the next decade than we are not on track to reach. That's a huge shortage. Those are also great jobs. So we have a big part of the population that's being denied that economic stability. But women are going to college in the United States. 60% of the bachelor's degrees right now are being given to women. But of those majors, only 20% of physics majors are women, and only 18% of engineers. So again, and those numbers are sort of similar for minorities too. So again, we're really denying and not supporting people who would make obviously huge contributions to society if they did so. So Wanjira, why don't we flip back to you? I'd love to hear, and of course your mother was an amazing role model, but I'd love, and I'm so sorry for your loss as well. The entire world was sorry with her passing. I would love to hear more about what you think about women's unique role in climate change and how you see women affected where you live.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. The role of women for us is, as I said, a strategic imperative. It has to be part of the solution. And I love what you said about women not being victims always, and it's always a statistic. But the other Greenbelt movement, for example, I know the strategy that we have always adopted is that women, I mean, the climate statistics are telling us that Africa will be disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change. Not to mention African women. The statistics you've mentioned about women are overlaid over the already dim statistics about the impacts of climate change. So it's a reality for us. It's also extremely important for us here in this part of the world to adopt, because we know that, and adapt to climate change, because we know that the impact, even if we were to resolve the climate crisis today, we know that the impacts of what is already damaged is going to be tremendously dire. We are already seeing devastating droughts and seasonal and rainfall patterns changing, harvests failing, famines. So we are already experiencing what is incredibly a difficult situation, and this is affecting disproportionately women. So in our programming, we are designing for impact by including women at the very start. We have to design every program that we have with the women in mind, and the role that women can play, not necessarily as participants, but as leaders. What is the leadership role that women can play? And that's why at the Wangari Maathai Institute, we're really excited about this W Power initiative, because what it's doing is essentially harnessing the potential of women to scale up the adoption of clean energy tech. We know that clean energy tech is part of the climate solution, certainly, but it is not going to reach the millions of women who need it desperately if it's being distributed conventionally. So we're looking at how we can essentially empower women to be to be energy entrepreneurs. How do we give women, basic women who have probably very little education, and that's the power of grassroots work. We've never really relied on an educated population. We always believe that the potential for women, regardless of their literacy, to transform is really great. So we work with women regardless of their literacy, and adopt our training programs so that we can give them the skills that they need. One, to develop successful businesses, small businesses around clean energy tech, so that they can distribute these technologies, they can use them, and they can foster the adoption of them. I think one of the biggest challenges is there are some incredible climate solutions out there, cooking solutions and also lighting solutions, but are they reaching the last mile? Are they reaching the women who actually need them? And the women are really, as I said, a strategic part of the equation, because if you reach them, you reach communities. So if we can reach these women, we know that we can reach multitudes of communities and families and buffer them from what is already expected to be pretty devastating. So for us, women are a part of the solution, yes, but they've got to be a part of the solution from the front line as leaders. And it is our responsibility to invest and make some of these programs of the scale that will be meaningful. There are many little initiatives out there that are trying to do something. But what we need to do is to make a decision and invest meaningful resources to scale so that this impact can be real. And that's really where we're spending a lot of our time, and we're putting a lot of our energies. And that's honestly why I'm here, because I know that that is really the solution.
Wow, I'm glad you brought that up. I know that the Cook Stove Initiative is something that people all around the world are worried about. Millions of women and children die from lung-related diseases as they cook over stoves. But scaling that up and getting those stoves across the world still remains a challenge. Nancy, why don't we hear from you next?
Clearly, women have a huge role to play in climate change. I think I can't say it any more articulately than Onjira just did. But I think even here in the United States, it's been my observation that women have an ability to bring issues to the attention of the government in a way that's hard to ignore. And I think sometimes, as the status quo sort of rolls along, there has to be a way to break through on issues. And I've observed that women speak very powerfully about impacts in their communities and on their families, and in a way that makes government pay attention. And so, we have to have that. We have to continue to build that dialogue in the United States. So, whether it's with community-based organizations, with the average citizen, and with women in leadership positions in the public sector and in the private sector, because I think we find a way to break through the sort of noise of everyday life by speaking of our own experiences. And so, we, for example, we just, as you know, we appointed a task force of state and local elected leaders to help us figure out how the U.S. federal government can be a better partner with communities in responding to the impacts of climate change. And we made sure that we recruited a number of really important women leaders around the United States to be a part of that task force. They have important roles to play in their communities, and they have an important role to play as we address climate change. So, when Jira spoke of the W Power initiative, and today I had the honor of announcing on behalf of USAID a partnership with the IUCN called GECO, which I'm going to have to look up exactly what it meant. The Gender Equality for Climate Change Opportunities, where USAID is providing some funding to IUCN to help to integrate gender into climate change related development programs at the local and national level. And I think that's another important point I would like to make, is just that those kinds of partnerships and the ability of government to partner with NGOs and with others in the community to help to support those kinds of efforts at the grassroots level is often, it's not, huge amounts of money in the scope of the U.S. federal budget, but makes a huge difference on the ground.
Sam?
So I think in WWF and maybe in other big environmental organizations, we're in the middle of a transition, right? And part of that transition for global organizations is understanding that the world looks radically different in Northern Europe or the United States than it does in, for example, South Africa or Uganda or Mexico or Brazil or Colombia and so on. One of the things that comes with that transition is the need to have a rights-based approach, and that includes gender rights. So one of the things that we're doing in our climate and energy work is we're trying to take on this rights-based approach. So it's not just gender rights, it's also human rights, the rights of indigenous peoples, and so forth. And what we see when we're at the start of this process, so I don't want to make it sound better than it is, but one of the things we see as we try to do this work is that it's one thing to have policies and practices about rights, and it's another thing to incorporate it into the work that you do and to measure whether you're having an impact. And especially if you're an environmental organization, to be thinking, are we having an impact on inequity, including gender inequity? Are we, for example, in our relationships with the corporate sector, are we also promoting the agendas, a rights-based agenda, an agenda in addition to an environmental agenda? So some of the things that we're doing, a couple of folks have talked already about the importance of energy access. And of course, this is critical because nearly half the world's population lacks access to clean, safe, reliable, and affordable electricity. I was in India not too long ago with my colleagues visiting a WWF field project in the Himalayan foothills, where we met with elders in a village, and we had worked with them to help to install biogas cookers, so clean cook stoves. And there are two things that were really eye-opening, well, three things that were eye-opening about just that one thing, just the biogas cook stoves. First of all, the women said that they had been using 2 to 3 hours a day to gather firewood every single day. And if you think about the burden of labor on women who don't have access to electricity, I mean, in addition to that 2 to 3 hours a day, there's also food, preparation of food and childcare and all the other things that women in this community are doing. So just lessening the burden of labor, that was a huge thing. The second thing was that I was in the cooking structure, cooking hut, where they had installed the biogas cooker, and where before everyone, they've been cooking over an open fire. And I looked at the ceiling, and it was black and shiny, exactly. And I see some nods of recognition. And I looked at it, and I realized what it was. It was all of the particulates from the smoke, year after year, which had been going into the lungs of the women who were cooking. And I've seen in other visits to communities, you'll see a woman, anyone who's ever had a kid, you know how it is. You're cooking with one hand, you've got the baby on the other hip. That's an experience we all share if we've had children. And so you see these smoke streams going into the faces not only of the women doing the cooking, but the babies, and that makes a huge impression. You really understand what you talked about, Alice. And the third thing was that when women have less labor, they are able to get education and to do other things. It's not just that they have less physical labor, but they're also able to do other things with their time. So just this access to energy, to clean energy, is huge. And I've had similar eye-opening experiences in communities that just got solar power. They have access to radio. Some of it, they can get refrigeration, all of these things. So if we really want to, I would say, if we really want to empower women or to contribute to that from environmental organizations, let us focus on providing, clean, safe, reliable, renewable energy to communities, because that one thing alone will do lots and lots for the empowerment of women.
You bring up something I think is important to note. Each community, each region, each country is very unique. We have very different cultural, educational opportunities, economic situations, and events like this are so important for us to be able to sit down and share those experiences so people understand where someone else is coming from. You might be talking to someone who women in their region will be lucky to finish grade school. I just met a young woman today who's economics PhD. I won't say her name. I'm never going to try to embarrass her, but econ right now is one of the best majors you can get in the United States. And she said there is no one less interested in what she has to say about the economics of climate change and energy investment than a 60-year-old white man. So we all have barriers that we run into, and you work hard, and you're trying to address something that's really meaningful. And I think it's really wonderful for us to share and to continue to come up with ways to support each other, whatever our personal barriers might be, to help other women, minorities, and of course men, who I call honorary women, to help us all move forward together. So I often don't think about things as women versus men at all, but we have to recognize where these barriers occur and be able to feel free about talking about them without feeling like you're whining or feeling sorry for yourself, because these are real things that happen. I was in a meeting not too long ago, not at my current job, and not so long ago, that I noticed every woman's idea, it was a table full of women and men, every woman's idea was debated. Every single woman's idea was debated, and every man's idea was nodded to and sagely agreed upon. I was blown away. And one of my male honorary women friends sent me a New Yorker cartoon right after that said, and it was a table of men and one woman. It said, "Mrs. Jones, that's a really great idea. Now, would one of the men repeat it so we can talk about it?" So these things unfortunately happen, and it's 2013. We don't think in some societies that you'd still be talking about this. So this continues to be important. It's why we're having Gender Day at a COP. So I think that was an important decision to make. Someday we won't have to have these, and we won't be talking about the first woman to do X or Y. But I'd love to open it up now to some questions. And Ashley, why don't you moderate? And I know you have a microphone for the audience.
And I'll bring you the microphone. Introduce yourself so that our online audience can be sure to hear your good question and know who you are. And then we'll turn it over to the panel. So please raise your hand if you have a question.
Hi, I'm Gail Carlson. I'm working with Energia, which is also an organization that works a lot on trying to engage women as energy entrepreneurs. But we haven't been engaged in the W Power, so I was interested in hearing a little bit more about that and how to get involved or connect with that.
Wanjira, do you want to talk about that? W Power?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's wonderful to hear from you, and suddenly we would welcome. One of the wonderful things about W Power is that it's a partnership and it's a network. At the moment, we have close to 13 partner members, and we are expanding and growing. We're most grateful for people like you who are going to make the impact happen. So absolutely, I think if you get online and search W Power, the Wangari Maathai Institute will soon have a website portal where you can actually go and get information. But if you go to the internet and just search for us, you'll no doubt find W Power and you'll be able to reach us. Unless there's someone there, I think maybe who can give you contacts, direct contacts.
And we met in Rio Plus 20 at an amazing women's retreat that we held down there with women from about 60 different countries. It's great to see you again.
And Wanjira, just to follow up on that W Power question, are you involved with the new hub at all, that you could speak to the new hub?
Yes, the Wangari Maathai Institute will be hosting the hub, which will be essentially, the hub speaks for itself, right? It will be the center where most of the activities around W Power will occur. Will be a platform where we'll be sharing best practices in clean energy technologies and clean cooking solutions, and also a place where we'll be providing targeted training on issues that will make a difference. Essentially, what are the last mile issues that will trigger and hasten the adoption of clean energy technology? So yes, I am actually the project director of the hub, and I'm based here in Nairobi at the Wangari Maathai Institute. So yes, I speak from the hub itself.
Good, thank you. We have another question here.
Hello to you all. I'm Indira Shakya from Nepal, and I also happen to be associated with Energia. And I'm very much impressed to hear about your experiences, especially because I've worked very closely with WWF and USAID, and I take this opportunity to thank you all for the wonderful work you have done in terms of energy interventions. And when you talk about biogas, I was directly involved with the biogas program implemented by WWF, so I guess that builds up a rapport with you at this stage. My sincere request to you all is that since you all have been working so closely with these two very big organizations that have an even more impact in terms of support that is carried on to my country, my one request would be that since you are in a good position there, to enforce the need for developing technical skill of the grassroots level people, because usually it's very difficult to influence these women when a man is talking to them because of the cultural and traditional taboos and norms that we have in our country. So if your program would build up an element where you focus on the technical skill development of the women at the grassroots level, I think that would speak a lot and go a long way in meeting the last miles, as Our Lady says, to take an even more bigger, action and activities to challenge the climate change impacts, because these are the people who are actually suffering from this burden, and they have nothing to do with it. But these will be the biggest mass that will be working indirectly towards adapting and mitigating towards the climate change in our country. So that's my sincere request. Thank you.
So Thank you very much. That was really nice to hear. And I also just wanted to respond to what you said about the issue of grassroots skills development. So WWF has actually gone into a partnership with Barefoot College, which works with women. They've started out in India working with women in villages and training them on the installation and maintenance of solar panels, for example. And then they have a training the trainers philosophy. So what we have done is we've worked with Barefoot College, for example, to bring some of their women technicians to villages in Madagascar and to train women in villages in Madagascar on how to install and maintain solar panels. And we're also looking at doing the same thing in Nepal and Uganda. And I think the thing about this, as someone said earlier, is that you don't have to be literate to be able to install and maintain technology. All you lack is the ability to read, and it's really up to, it's really up to the trainers to do things in a way that can be understood by folks who both are literate and non-literate, right? So that's also the approach in the Barefoot College. So we hope that you will see more women trainers at the grassroots level, also in Nepal.
That's such a great point. We've seen a huge transformation in NGOs across the world, particularly in developing countries, who have gone from, sort of well-meaning but not very useful charity models to really listening to people in these communities about what they need, developing micro-investment strategies, helping teach people a skill, having culturally appropriate teaching methods, women to women, maybe clean water kiosks or beads for life, creating jewelry out of waste paper, and things that actually work in their communities rather than someone coming in and saying, here's some money and you shall do this. So I think we've seen just a great improvement of how NGOs are working, and I think the micro investment is something that's incredibly important and we should support.
Okay, other questions? And then also, let's make sure that our online audience asks us with hashtag AskUSCenter on Twitter. Sorry, was there one up here? Yes? Okay.
Thank you. I am Sumaya Omar Abdoun from Sudan. I am very pleased to attend this very important session. And we in Sudan, as one of the least developed countries, we have many experience in climate change adaptation and mitigation done by women, but not counted. The hours spent by women to do such work are not counted or not recognized. So I call for a global mechanism so as to gather the women, especially the least developed countries' women, so as to enhance their contribution, if this contribution is direct or indirect, and this contribution should be developed, and this mechanism, if we can succeed to develop it, we can sensitize or ensure gender mainstreaming in the climate change. For me, I held many leadership positions. By now, I am director of Khartoum Forest State. Previously, I had been the Sudan National Discourse Forum chairperson, and I have many skills in leadership, but we need support and enhancement so as to sustain the leadership position for Sudanese women. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Should we take one more and then you can see if we have any responses?
Thank you so much for the presentations and experiences. I'm coming from Zambia. I wanted to just a little bit contribute about the women organizations, because I'm coming from an NGO, Zambia Institute of Environmental Management, and we were running some project on energy efficiency, where we are assessing the efficiency of cook stoves, the traditional cook stoves. And it was somewhat disheartening to see some of the responses we were getting on the ground, because we were really going direct into the kitchens where women cook. And we get there the first day to assess, because we were using kitchen performance test, where we are measuring charcoal and would measure the emissions that are coming from charcoal on a particular brazier. And then we are comparing it with an improved cook stove. And the first 3 days, we couldn't start because most households didn't really agree with their husbands on whether we could be allowed to enter the kitchen. And it was really tough. And we felt that this particular issue is quite, very sensitive. So we had to change the strategy and try to recruit some students, female students, all of them. And we tried, again, failed. So we, again, came up with a different strategy to now identify those households where men were really tough to allow their women to participate in the project. And then we had more like, we called them on the side and discussed with them and asked them if they want, they could participate in the project. And then we saw a little bit of some change. And I was thinking in terms of how best could we roll up this project in Zambia. Yes, we have the Ministry of Gender, but much of the issues are so much into policy because it was a new ministry. We are doing so much in terms of policy, but we haven't really gone down to grassroots. So I really don't know how best the USAID program or any other institutions would assist Zambia, especially women organizations dealing with environment and in particular energy, would really attract the participation of women, probably in terms of training. Yes, from the civil society point of view, we have few organizations on the ground, but sometimes financing is a challenge. And this really, makes the participation quite difficult. Thank you.
One of our colleagues who was ill today and could not be here is from USAID. I'll grab your contact information afterwards, and perhaps we can connect you and see if there's any ways that she can follow up with you.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I guess the only thing I would add is just I think that that story, emphasized why it's so important to work in partnership with organizations on the ground, because whether it's USAID or other assistance that comes from the United States, those kinds of partnerships I think make a huge difference. I just wanted to comment for a minute on the comment from the woman from Sudan on taking account of women's work. So just to mention, this morning I participated in a panel that was sponsored by the IUCN, launching their Environment and Gender Index, which is very interesting, where they looked at statistics over from 72 countries and tried to come up with some categories of measures that relate to environment and gender. So if you have a moment to take a look at that. And they had little summaries for a number of countries of things that stood out. And for the United States, it was that we had the lowest rate of anemia in the world, and we had fewer women in policy-making positions than Bangladesh, and I can't remember the second country. So just for myself, I would say I'm a woman in a policy-making position, and I do not have anemia.
So you're 50-50 on that scale. A former colleague of mine, Gillian Bowser, is in the back. I know she had her hand up. And I'm not sure if we have much time, or if there's anyone on the web. How are we on time, by the way?
We're good. We've got a few more minutes. So.
Gillian, why don't you go ahead? I was going to actually mention the survey you're doing anyway.
I'll let you go ahead and talk about the survey, if that's okay. But I just wanted to do a quick comment on to the environmental organizations. And there was a wonderful session at the Gender Day today called 1 Million Women. And they put the charge back on the women of the developed world to look at ourselves and ask how we are being sustainable and how we are taking in climate change. So that would be my question to the panel. What are we doing about it as women from a developed world? Rather than always looking towards the developing world, we also are responsible for the vast majority of carbon. But Alice, if you could talk about the survey, that'd be fabulous.
Well, I think you're looking at 3 women who are trying to do something anyway. Gillian is part of a National Science Foundation grant called the Global Women Scholars Network, and I know she's doing surveys while she's here in Warsaw. And one of the goals was capacity building of women around the world, developing countries or underrepresented countries. One of the things we've heard and learned that women don't often network as well. They don't professionally network as well. So we're actually I was on the grant, I'm not anymore, doing a computer analysis of how people network. So if you want to raise your hand, Gillian, if anyone wants to be part of the Global Women Scholars Network, there's a really cool Facebook group, a really dynamic group of women. And I'll just mention, we had a retreat in Uganda this summer, and it was such a talking about learning people's lives. None of the women at the retreat, save one of the Ugandan women who were there, said that to a person, they said none of them had ever been on a vacation or had anyone do anything for them. I mean, so it's such a different life experience. And, of course, one of the women had to quit a job because her boss was trying to force her to have sex with him. And then you think about the different issues we have in the developed world. It's sometimes hard to fathom, but again, I think that's why it's so important to have us all in a continuing conversation so we can, again, try to understand each other's lives and the realities about what we're facing, because it's one thing to talk about it, and it's another thing to really address things on a culturally appropriate level.
Because when you're advocating change, you have to start with yourself, right? And that's especially true for somebody like me who's from the US and lives in Northern Europe. So there are things that I do personally. I won't, bore you with the detail, but I'm happy to say what they are. They involve, how I heat my home living in Norway. They involve not eating meat and so forth. But I fly a lot because of my global job, and I at times think about the guy who's involved in the IPCC process, who after the last series of reports decided he was going to stop flying. And that means he doesn't see his parents and siblings and whatever live in other parts of the world, but he just thinks that it's no longer responsible for him to fly. And I think that when you work in climate change, you really have to think about this stuff, right? Because it's one thing it's not just a developing world country. Also working in an environmental organization, we are asking people to change all the time and to be transparent about their change, and we have to be willing to change ourselves. So also at an organizational level, we do a lot of things by video conference and so forth. We have other ways, Green Office and all those things. But I think the biggest thing we can do is to try to be decent examples ourselves and to encourage everyone around us to do that. And to talk to the people that we, are supporters and members about consumption, because most of our members are in the developed world, and we have to be able to persuade people to reduce their consumption, and not just to tell them that they can do that in ways that don't require any change in lifestyle or in consumerism.
Okay, also we have a lot of chatter online supporting a lot of the points that have been made and thanking our panelists for some of the advice that you've given. So keep up that chatter. Did I see a hand go up over here? Okay.
Do you want to make? While we're waiting,
one more point on the question of the developed world. I think one thing that every woman in the developed world can do is to educate themselves about the impacts of climate change on their own communities and their impacts around the world. And I mean, I can see from here the NASA Hyperwall back there. There's a tremendous amount of information available at, from the very, very technical to really sort of for a lay audience. But I think I think that we all have the opportunity to educate ourselves about not only the impacts of climate change, but the things that we can do in our own lives and in our communities to address climate change. I'll just make one example. One of the people we put on our task force is Mayor Dawn Zimmer from Hoboken, New Jersey, who I honestly have no idea what she thought about climate change before Hurricane Sandy flooded Hoboken, New Jersey, but I'm sure she will have a lot to contribute to our task force. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Marcia Trump. I'm with Abt Associates, and I've been working in climate change since about 1989, working with some of the pioneering companies, and most recently working with USAID on some LEDS projects, where we had actually a very significant amount of women participation, not only as trainers, but also as a country host participants, as far as country coordinators. So one of the things that I really want to stress is we've seen, those of us who've been in here working, in the trenches at different levels in the fields and doing implementation, we've seen a dramatic change as far as the involvement of women. And so I think you need to go back and reflect on that and say there's been a lot of positive change, obviously, Christiana and a variety of other folks too. But I think also it's our responsibility as those of us work up through the whatever positions we're in, to make sure that those hands go out to other people coming along too. Because we're making decisions now where we're deciding on salaries, we're deciding on what their opportunities, how can we advise them, they're more coming to us for career path decisions, and how do I navigate this, how do I navigate that? And I think that's a really, really important role for all of us to take very seriously, because we've been given a lot because of other people before us. And I think, again, what we call passing it forward is really, really important also. And not to forget that, because it was somewhat scary when they said the green jobs are sort of going away a bit more. I'd had a different opinion, but some of the people from the banking sector were saying, oh, well, or even some of the companies, green jobs aren't out there as much. And I thought to myself, there's a whole generation coming, and lots of generations coming right now, that we need to make sure that those green jobs are out there for them too, because they've got a lot to contribute, and they make the partnerships a lot tighter and better.
Thank you.
And let me just, because we only have a couple more minutes left and we've gotten some feedback from the web, and let me just, in addition to responding to Marcia's good comments, let's go back full circle and realize that while we all are pretty well informed on this issue, we have a live web audience that is out there wondering, well, what is really the gist of why climate and gender matter? Why are we talking about this? And I think you've gotten to some of that in your introductory remarks, but maybe as we respond to this and as we close, what's your sort of 10-second spiel? Why does climate and gender matter? Why do we have a Gender Day here at UNFCCC? Okay.
And I want to make sure Wanjira has a chance to make some remarks as well. We haven't turned to her in a few minutes. So anything you wanted to add to the last bit of conversation?
Yeah, I cannot see you guys anymore, but I hope you can see me.
We can.
Okay, that's good. I wanted to respond earlier, but I said I would wrap it into everything I say to my sister from Sudan and also to the gentleman from Zambia. I think one of the most important things is, especially in the adoption and at this last mile stage of these clean tech solutions, is that we have to be very cognizant of the sociocultural issues that are playing into the slow adoption or the lack of adoption of some of the best clean tech or clean cooking solutions. So I would really emphasize the importance of a consultation process, especially with the men involved, where they in fact will invite you in to the kitchens so that they can benefit from what are already life-changing clean cooking solutions, and they wouldn't want their families, once they know what the human health impacts are, to be affected. So I just wanted to say that. Did you want me to respond to that last one in closing?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the last thing.
Did you want me to close with that last?
Sure. Why don't you go ahead and close, because I think we're going to wrap up
Okay, I just wanted to say, I mean, for us, the issue of gender and climate is really not a choice. It's an obligation. This is our last shot at it. This is it. And so we're looking at how we can engage women and the role of women as leaders so that we can make the last massive impact as needed. Because we know that the role that women play, we know that the time is short, but we know that initiatives like the ones we're involved in, W Power, and all the people in that room, if we can come together under an umbrella like W Power and really bring our best ideas together, put them on the table, and get our supporters to invest in the best of these solutions, we know we can make an impact on climate change. Certainly we can make sure that families and individuals around the world survive the onslaught that seems to be already at our doorstep.
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure being on the panel with you today. Sam, would you like to make some closing remarks?
So one thing we know for sure about climate change is that it means an increase in extreme weather events. So heat waves, storms, and so forth. And another thing we know for sure, as we've talked about in this panel, is that women and children are disproportionately affected, lose their lives during extreme weather events. And so even if it's just on that level, what we know is that it's very important both to act on climate change because of the cost in human lives and suffering, but that this is also something that disproportionately affects women. Now the flip side of it is, as we spent a lot of time talking about, is that when you focus on energy access, not because of emissions, but because people live in energy poverty and energy is essential to development, that it can have a hugely empowering effect for women in communities. So education, lessening the burden of physical labor and so forth. So those are two very big reasons why we should be caring about climate and gender, also in the energy space.
Nancy?
I think I agree with what my colleagues here on the stage have said and about why this is important. I guess I really just wanted to emphasize the point that Sam just made about this notion of this is a route to empowering women in a way, and I've certainly seen that throughout the last 40 years in the United States as the environment, women responding to environmental threats in their own community has empowered them, and we've seen the impact of that in empowering women in the U.S. And I think that's true around the world as women try to respond to the threats to their community. That it is also a route to empowering women just beyond the issues of climate change or the environment.
Thank you. And not to repeat anything folks just said, but I think women do bring a unique voice to the leadership table as well. There's been some studies that have shown, and my life as a political leader, as a majority leader that ran a caucus, I can say that I don't know if it's because we're primary caretakers for the most part, but women are really amazing leaders in the political space because they're not always thinking about themselves. They really realize to succeed, they need everyone moving in the same direction. And we had a phrase, I'm as dedicated as your success as I am to my own. And really feeling that, the old saying, a rising tide raises all ships. Women often adopt that policy, but more academically speaking, there's been studies show that women are often transformational leaders as opposed to transactional. And a transformational leader will look at the broader ecosystem of change that needs to happen and approach it from, maybe a more comprehensive manner versus A for B. If you do good, I'm going to, give you a raise. If you don't, I'm going to punish you. But more looking about how we can all move forward and reach our goal together. So that's just yet another reason why having women voices at a negotiating table will make a difference. Thank you for being here physically today. Thank you for those online listening to us. Thank you so much, Wanjira, for joining us from your home. And I think we'll wrap up. Thank you, Ashley.
Round of applause for our moderator and our panelists. Thanks again for joining us at the U.S. Center. We have a full schedule of events tomorrow, so we hope that we will see you here at 11 a.m. with the Carbon Disclosure Project, Creating Business Value by Taking Climate Action. Okay, and we have a NASA presentation also here in 5 minutes, and that's our last presentation of the day, is the NASA Hyperwall in 5 minutes. Thank you.